Okay, let's have a look at the Baitcaster. Baitcaster reel sits on top of the rod, unlike a spinning reel which sits underneath the rod. So that's the first thing to know. These are the handles. Yeah, self-explanatory. When you wind them, the reel comes in. Now, this is a release button. Unlike on a Baitcaster, unlike on a spinning reel, a Baitcaster requires the spool to be put into free spool before you can cast the line. That button is the release button. On some, particularly older reels, you'll find it's actually up on the side here. It's a button that you press in on the side and that puts you into free spool. Now, when you're not in free spool, it's on an anti-reverse and it only pulls against the drag, which is this little lever here, the star drag. Most Baitcasters have a star drag. I'm not aware of any that don't. There might be one out there, but I don't know what it is. Now the drag increases tension on the spool so that you can fight fish, and it resists the line being taken, just stripped straight off. So that's the drag. Now we get to these cast controls, and you'll see a lot of people tell you that that you have to play with the controls between each and every lure change. I don't like to do that myself. I've got my controls backed right off and I leave them there. I never play with those controls, and I'm not about to start now. This one's easy to adjust, it's just back right off. The other one's a little harder. Now this one is a centrifugal brake. When you're new to bait casting, what you might want to do is turn that all the way up, because the centrifugal brake has little blocks that fly out to the edges when you accelerate the spin of the reel, so when you're casting, and that regulates the rotation. So if you rotate too fast, line will spool off faster than the lure's travelling, and you'll end up with an overrun. So when that's backed right up, it puts tension on so it doesn't allow the spool to spin as fast. This one here is much the same. That's the mechanical brake. It just puts direct friction tension onto the spindle of the spool, and again prevents it from spinning too fast. Now, if you turn it anti-clockwise, it'll decrease the tension that's on the spindle, allowing the reel to spin faster. If you turn it clockwise, it increases that tension. So when you're first learning, it might be handy to just have it a little bit tight so that your lure is not falling in free fall. Mine is falling in free fall, and when it hits the ground, my reel keeps spinning. But the idea is that those will increase the tension on the line, on the spool, which prevents the line from overrunning as the spool runs faster than the lure is flying and feeds more line into the system than can be dragged off. So when you're first starting, turn the centrifugal brake all the way to maximum, then adjust the mechanical brake so that your lure just gently falls, and when it hits the ground, the spool stops spinning quickly. How I control my spool is with my thumb. It's all in the thumb. You hear people tell you it's all in the controls. No, it's all in the thumb. If you just have a little bit of friction on the spool created by your thumb against the spool, it's called feathering the spool. You just put a little bit of tension on the spool to prevent it running too fast when you first cast, and then you lighten the tension a little bit, and when it hits the water you tighten up again to stop it spinning. If you don't, you can be in trouble. However, that's the best way to learn. Don't become reliant on the cast controls, because then you will have to play with it every time you change lures, and the lures of different weights will affect the reel differently. So if you become reliant on thumb controlling, it is much more beneficial to you in the long run. Might be easier to learn with the controls turned right up, but it's not the best way. So my recommendation is to use the centrifugal drag, have the mechanical drag set light, have the centrifugal drag set up, and then gradually you'll be able to back the centrifugal drag off as you get more familiar with thumbing the spool. Getting a lot of little takes here on the egg beater, which I've got out with a bait on it. Nothing there though. So we'll get back to the Baitcaster. Anyway, so like I was saying, just a little bit of pressure from your thumb on the spool will stop it spinning. Like I said, I fish with mine backed right off. So that the bait will drop freely. Now, there's a couple of reasons I do that. First one is, I often fish very, very small baits. That's a 1/16 jig head with 1 inch, 2 inch, tail grub, and there's not a lot of weight to it. Now, people will tell you that you can't cast anything under about 3.5, maybe 4 grams on a Baitcaster. I do it all the time, so it's about the technique you use. None of this double-handed flipping it with the reel on top. You turn your hand to the side, and I will show you then how to cast. So that's the basics of bait casting. I'm sure you will find plenty of people doing it very differently to my way. In fact, the majority of people doing it very differently to my way. And ultimately, they are just making life difficult for themselves, as I will explain when I get on to how to cast. Come on, take it. I find it handy also when you're retrieving. If you keep tension on the line there, it'll spool onto the reel properly. So I always hold it between my thumb and forefinger, just in front of the reel, far enough in front of the reel that you can let the level wind here feed backwards and forwards and feed line onto the reel evenly. But keeping enough tension to spool it on tight. Otherwise you can find that at times you'll end up with loose loops on the line, which will throw overruns when you cast. But you'll find a lot of misinformation about bait casters. They were designed to be cast in a specific way, and everyone seems to have forgotten that. The whole reason for that trigger grip is because you're using only your fingers and that is your pivot point. None of this double-handed gripping it and trying to throw it. It doesn't work, although that seems to be how everyone does it. Don't know why it ever was thought that that was a good way to do it. I hate it. It's awkward. It doesn't throw your lure as far, and you can't throw as light a weight. So seems to be a thing from the American bass circuit, and it's fair enough if you're flipping big baits on a 9-foot rod to use two hands, but anything under about 8 foot, like the 6.6 that I'm using here, 6'6" it's a single-handed, turn the rod and flick the bait. That has gone all the way out there. Not sure if you could see the forms, but just a simple flick of the wrist. Actually, it's actually a flick of the fingers, and it gets the bait or the lure easily as far, if not further, than anyone who's doing a double-handed lob. It really just makes life difficult. So, something to think about. And I'll show you how to cast properly. And by properly I mean properly, how the rod is designed to be used. Because it sure as heck doesn't have that trigger there for decoration. That trigger is functional, and it's so that you can put plenty of pressure onto the handle of the rod when you're casting. So, you often see people trying to flick a bait caster like this, and in my opinion that's entirely wrong. You turn the bait caster to the side like this, under your casting clip, whatever, lever, and then it's all in the wrist from there. All these fingers, the 3 back fingers control it. The pivot is on the trigger, which is the only reason the trigger's there, and then you control it with your thumb. And it's all a flick movement. There's none of this trying to pop it out hard or anything. I can cast a lure further using a flick like that than most people can doing this, because I've got a full range of movement in my wrist when it's turned like that. There's a full range of movement there, from the back of my shoulder all the way through. However, this way I have this much movement. So, trying to cast like this will wear you out, and it's very difficult. However, with just a light flick. Control it with your thumb, and you'll cast it right out there. So once again, it's just a matter of. You'll also hear people tell you that you've got to play with this control, and it's all in the thumb. The control is all in the thumb. Don't worry too much about those controls. It's just all mine back right off, and you just use the flick. So I hope that helps, Shannon. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll try and clarify what I'm saying. But quite a lot of people I watch, and it's just frustrating to see them making life difficult for themselves by doing this type of thing, particularly out on a kayak, in a boat, whatever. It's over the shoulder and straight out. None of this round arm, trying to get movement in your wrist by going round. Over the shoulder, straight out, turn your reel on the side. All the power comes from those fingers. It's all in the fingers. So, I hope that helps. Anyway, I'll cut this off now, and thanks for watching.